do a first aid certificate in PE or outdoor ed or gateway. All of the students could do this when they do health. Year 11 would be a good year to bring it into the curriculum, and that's when they're starting to think about getting their learner drivers.
Good. Makes a lot of sense, Karen. Kia ora. Thank you for that. That's Karen Ayres there, talking about a first aid from First Training Emergency, and that is the show. Paula Penfold and Simon Pound, who's so up with life. What are you doing now? Up for a dance?
He's smiling.
I'm off to play social netball, so hopefully I don't get injured.
There you go. Keep up the golden days, Simon Pound. And a bit of Aretha Franklin, because 5 years ago today, the great singer passed away. I'm Wallace Chapman, back tomorrow 3:45. Lisa Owen with Checkpoint next.
My darling, believe me. For me, there is no one but you. Please love me true. This is my prayer. Answer my prayer now, baby. This is my
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, guilty. Lauren Dickerson is convicted of murdering her 3 young daughters. We'll have reaction and speak to an expert. The dairy market turns sour with some farmers' profits circling the drain pipe. Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor is live and gummies on because we're going to the farm too. The mother of a vape-addicted teen is among those petitioning Parliament for tougher laws. The tiny cyclone-devastated town struggling to make a comeback. Old school pen pals of 70 years finally meet face to face, and the Matildas and Lionesses go head to head, or should that be foot to foot? Who is a Kiwi to support? Watch us live on the RNZ website.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. No mai, haere mai. Good afternoon. I'm Karen McCarthy. Lauren Dickason has been found guilty of murdering her 3 young daughters. In the High Court at Christchurch, her defence had argued she was insane at the time of killing 2-year-old twins Carla and Maya and Liane, 6, and it was an act of infanticide. The 12-person jury reached the majority verdicts after 2 days of deliberation.
Do 11 of you find the defendant, Lauren Ann Dickerson, guilty of murder, or do you find the defendant, Lauren Ann Dickerson, not guilty of murder?
Guilty of murder.
On charge 2, do 11 of you find the defendant, Lauren Ann Dickerson, guilty of murder, or do you find the defendant, Lauren Ann Dickerson, not guilty of murder?
Guilty of murder.
Jurors were heard crying as they left the courtroom. Lauren Dickerson stood motionless in the dock as the verdicts were read out, quietly weeping as she left. Lauren Dickerson's parents, Malcolm and Wendy Fawkes, have thanked the people of New Zealand, South Africa and from around the world for their support and understanding. They say it was not their daughter, but a debilitating mental illness, which resulted in the deaths of the 3 young children. Mr. and Mrs. Fawkes said their beloved Liane, Carla and Maya were taken from this life as a result of postpartum depression. Police have extended their deepest sympathies to family members who will never get to see Liane, Maya and Carla grow up and live their lives. Detective Inspector Scott Anderson acknowledged the Dickerson and Fawkes families for their assistance throughout the investigation. He says it was a challenging and complex investigation from attending the scene on the night to the completion of the trial. National says it's an incredibly sad day as the Reserve Bank leaves the official cash rate unchanged. The central bank has held the OCR at 5.5% as expected and reaffirmed rates will stay high well into next year. The National Party's leader, Christopher Luxon, says it will be tough news for many.
Oh, look, incredibly sad day for New Zealanders. There's no relief in sight on interest rates. I think about all those families that are actually a third of Kiwi mortgage holders are going to refix before Christmas. And what we're seeing is actually a dire set of economic indicators from New Zealand.
The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, says he knows it's tough for those who bought houses when interest rates were low. He says the Reserve Bank holding the OCR steady shows it believes its action to reduce inflation is working. Dairy farmers say they'll be tightening their belts after international dairy prices crashed to their lowest levels in nearly 5 years overnight. Katrina Pearson milks about 450 cows on 190 hectares near Whangarei in Northland. She won't be breaking even this season.
We've sort of done some back-of-the-envelope equations for this system, and we're going to make a loss this year. So it's pretty disheartening. You know, you're going to work to lose money.
Whole milk powder, which strongly affects the payout for farmers, fell almost 11% at the global dairy trade auction overnight amid softening demand from China. Earlier this month, Fonterra slashed its forecast payout for the 2023-24 season. WorkSafe says it's unusual for a workplace prank to go so horribly wrong after a joke sparked a gas explosion and left 5 workers in hospital last year. A barbecue gas bottle was mistakenly left running overnight in a shipping container at a construction site in Auckland's Wynyard Quarter last August. When the 5 workers opened the container, they could smell gas. One of the workers joked about igniting his lighter, and when he did, the gas exploded. WorkSafe's Paul Budd says it's the first investigation he's been involved in that's the result of a prank.
It's unusual for a joke to go so terribly wrong. We don't get a lot of jokes that end up in WorkSafe investigations normally.
In sport, the Matildas' tidal wave of support has Australia excited about tonight's FIFA World Cup semi-final in Sydney. If they win, Australia will be the first hosts to reach the final since USA's victory on home soil in 1999. England are bidding to become the 6th nation to reach both the men's and women's World Cup final. Matilda's keeper, Mackenzie Arnold, who became one of Australia's favourite sportspeople after her heroics in the quarter-final win over France, says having the majority of the 82,000 fans supporting them will be massive.
They've really grown with us throughout this whole tournament. From the first game till the last, it's just grown, and even outside of the stadium, the amount of support that we have from all over the country has been absolutely unreal, and they're really like a 12th man out there for us, and I really do believe they've gotten us over the line on more times than once, so they're going to be vital for us.
The winner will play Spain in Sunday's final. Kick-off is at 10 p.m. New Zealand time. The 2024 Super Rugby Pacific draw has been released, with the season opening game in Hamilton a repeat of this year's final between the champion Crusaders and the Chiefs. All of the round 2 games will be played in Melbourne. The Fijian Drua will again play their 7 home games in Fiji, and Moana Pacifica is currently exploring opportunities to host fixtures in Samoa and other destinations across the Pacific. A venue also has yet to be confirmed for the Blues home games in Auckland for the season. That's the news.
Grant Robertson deems the World Cup a success for the country.
On a cold Tuesday night in August, 40,000 plus people went along to see a football match that didn't involve New Zealand.
Christopher Luxon previews National's tax plan.
We're going to see a great tax plan that's fully funded, and we take that seriously because we have seen so much economic mismanagement.
And pre-election tensions rise in Parliament.
The public knows what goes on down here. That's why the public generally ignores what goes on down here.
From their mouths to your ears, Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Lisa Owen and Checkpoint next up after the short forecast from Met Service to midnight on Thursday. For Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine spells and a few showers, clearing tomorrow morning or afternoon. For the remainder of the North Island, showers, heavy at times with isolated thunderstorms. Showers becoming confined to the west tomorrow. Snow affecting the Desert Road, clearing tomorrow afternoon. Marlborough Sounds, Nelson, Buller and Westland. Fine about Westland. Elsewhere showers, some heavy, with snow to 800 metres and possible thunderstorms, clearing this evening and becoming fine. The remainder of Marlborough and Canterbury, showers with snow to 700 metres, clearing tomorrow morning or afternoon and becoming fine. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, isolated showers becoming widespread this afternoon and evening, with snow lowering to 800 metres late. Showers clearing in the morning but returning to Fiordland tomorrow evening, and the Chatham Islands partly cloudy. It's 5:06.
Nā mihi e ho, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Guilty of 3 counts of murder. A jury this afternoon handed down its verdicts in the Lauren Dickerson trial, ruling she had intentionally killed her 3 young daughters in September 2021. Dickerson had only been in New Zealand a matter of weeks, having moved here from South Africa with her family to set up a new life in Timaru. When her husband Graham left for a work function, she killed her children and put them in their beds. That fact was never in doubt, but Lauren Dickerson argued she was driven to do it either through insanity or infanticide. Today, the majority of the jury of 8 women and 4 men disagreed, ultimately finding Lauren Dickerson knew what she was doing when she murdered her children. This was not our daughter, Lauren Dickerson's family has said in a statement, blaming a debilitating mental illness which resulted in an awful tragedy. Our reporter Neva Chittick has been covering the case and she joins us now from Christchurch. Kia ora, Neva, tell us more about this verdict.
Kia ora, Lisa. As you've said there, these are majority verdicts. So 11 of the jurors agreed that Lauren Dickerson was guilty of murder. 1 did not. Now, they preferred a unanimous verdict, so all 12 jurors were agreed. But this afternoon, shortly before the verdict, Justice Cameron Manda gave them the majority option, so they were able to have this 11-1 verdict. It also means that the jury found that Mrs. Dickerson was not insane at the time of the killings.
And what was the reaction in court?
Lauren Dickerson herself, she was motionless in the dock when the verdict was read out, but she did cry as she was being led out of the courtroom. Some jurors were also audibly crying as they left the room. I mean, it was pretty hard to keep a dry eye in the courtroom. This has been 4 weeks of high emotion, and there was just this big release today when that verdict was read out. Police have released a statement about the verdict this afternoon. The lead detective who is in charge of this case, Detective Inspector Scott Anderson, began by saying words cannot begin to express the tragic circumstances of this investigation, and they extend their deepest sympathies to the families. He just said as well that, you know, there's been a lot of hard work and dedication that's gone into this. It's spanned 4 weeks, a month. There's also been a lengthy investigation prior to this. And it's been challenging and complex, Detective Inspector Scott Anderson said there.
And what about Lauren Dickerson's family?
So her parents, Wendy and Malcolm Fawkes, they've been in court for much of the trial. They were there today, and they've released a statement thanking the people of New Zealand, South Africa and around the world who've been so understanding of the effects of postpartum depression and mental illness. Now, that's in relation to Lauren Dickerson's defence being built around insanity and infanticide. So they said that she was insane at the time of the killings and that an underlying cause of her being insane was postpartum depression. So they've talked about how there are no winners in this tragedy. We would like to encourage families and individuals around the world to be aware of the symptoms of postpartum depression as early as possible, both for yourselves as well as close family and friends around you. If treated early and managed correctly, people can experience a full recovery. The person experiencing depression and those closest to them may not be able to recognise the signs or how serious postpartum depression can become. So something clearly that the family still believe, saying that this was not our daughter, but a debilitating mental illness which resulted in an awful tragedy. Our beloved Leonie, Carla and Maya were taken from this life to another as a result of this crippling disease.
And what happens to Lauren Dickerson now?
Justice Cameron Manda has detained her in a mental health facilities. That will be Hillmorton Hospital here in Christchurch until her sentencing. There has been no date set yet for that sentencing, and it's unclear if the defence or anyone else is looking to appeal this sentence, or verdict, I should say.
Thank you, Neva. That is Neva Chittick joining us live from Christchurch there. If you are just joining us, guilty of 3 counts of murder, the jury has returned majority verdicts in the case of Lauren Dickerson, finding that she intentionally killed her 3 daughters. It is 12 minutes after 5. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Going to work to lose money. Dairy farmers around the country say they'll be tightening their belts after international dairy prices crashed to their lowest levels in nearly 5 years overnight. Those still carrying debt fear for their viability, while more established players are going over their budgets with a fine-tooth comb. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin has more.
Jacques Lepro farms 400 cows with his wife Vanessa on 140 hectares in Pihama in South Taranaki. he's worried.
We'll be really under the pump this year. We've gone through our budgets and we're really going to be pulling everything in. We're not going to be doing any extra spending. We're going to be watching our budgets monthly and really just hopefully we can survive through each month by month, really.
Jacques Lepro, who has 4 primary school-aged children, has converted 2 farms into one inside the last 10 years.
Now the farm is humming along really well, but yeah, the interest rates obviously been close to 8%, and yeah, with the GDT dropping, the milk payout is dropping. We are going to be in a tight times.
The price of whole milk powder, which strongly affects the payout for local farmers, fell almost 11% at the global dairy trade auction overnight, amid softening demand from China. It's the lowest level in nearly 5 years. Earlier this month, Fonterra slashed its forecast payout for the 2023-2024 season to $6.25 per kilogram of milk solids from $7.75, with a midpoint of $7. Katrina Pearson milks about 450 cows on her 190-hectare family farm near Whangarei in Northland. She's taken a hit.
If you put it at $1 a kilo, that's close to $200,000 out of the farm's budget. And then you put it on top of all of the other inflated prices for farm operating costs, it does become quite a challenging scenario for the farm to remain viable.
Katrina Pearson is resigned to making a loss.
We've sort of done some back-of-the-envelope equations for this system, and yeah, we're going to make a loss this year. So it's pretty disheartening. You know, you're going to work to lose money, but whether you do that for a season or two, or do you continue for 5 seasons, and then at that point the bank might come knocking?
She says things could be even worse for farmers who've recently bought into the sector. Charles Whitehead farms about 780 cows on 320 hectares near Methven in Canterbury. He says the latest global dairy auction sends a chilling message about New Zealand's reliance on the Chinese market.
It's crept right up to 3 or 4% of what Fonterra sells China. But when there's a sneeze in China or China doesn't enter the market, all of a sudden we haven't got enough markets that can take up that slack.
Charles Whitehead says there'll now be a scramble on to find new buyers for our milk powder. Meanwhile, Jacques Lepro is determined to keep an optimistic outlook.
Been through this before, and although it's tough, you do come out the other side, and you've still just got to have some fun along the way as well. So like, there's lots of things you can do for free that's fun. Like we surf. The waves are free. You know, for a couple $100 surfboard, our whole family, we can have fun.
Experts say the downward price trend for dairy products could continue, and farmers are being urged to keep in close contact with their banks.
And joining us now is Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor. Kia ora, Minister. How much has this just sucked out of the economy?
Kia ora. Well, obviously a huge amount. I haven't done the figures. I'm sure others will be doing that, other than to say it's a big hit on the dairy industry, our single biggest industry, the biggest export earner, and it drives economic growth and the well-being of our rural communities.
So tens of millions or hundreds of millions, do you think?
There'll be hundreds of millions, and the impact on individual farmers, on those supplying the farmers, local communities, and ultimately on the tax take for the Crown. So it's bad news all round. But as was said, these are cycles, particularly frequent in commodities, and things will pick up again, and it is going to be hard for many. Hopefully, we've just got to help them with whatever they need. The banks have to help them with whatever they need to get through these tough times.
We'll get to the banks in a minute, but it's a relatively long-term trend. Last year and a half, prices have been tanking, and analysts say that this is not a surprise. So given that, what's the government been doing to diversify markets and make us less reliant on China?
We've negotiated a free trade agreement with the UK. We've negotiated a free trade agreement with the EU, both strong traditional markets. The industry might say not as much volume as they would have liked by way of opportunity into the EU. Nonetheless, it is a significant step forward. The UK, the doors are pretty much open after a couple of years. So we've got other opportunities. We have been saying to the industry and to all those exporters, they need to get out and look for other opportunities. In dairy, we produce about 2.5% of total world production. We are the single biggest trader, but that means there are lots of markets around the world that are looking for where there are gaps that we can fill the I guess, inadequate supply from seasonal change or whatever other disruptions have occurred.
So would you agree that we're still too reliant on China?
Well, we are, and as a small business owner, if you've got over 30% of your income reliant on one customer, then it's a somewhat fragile and exposed position to be in. We've been saying that to industry. I mean, China's been a very strong and will continue to be a very strong market for us. They've been through COVID, slower recovery than people thought. It's the inevitable consequences, and they have got supplies stored that they'll want to use up before they buy more in the market. The GDT, the global dairy trade, is an indicator, and I'm hoping that Fonterra, while it's projecting, a lower return, that at the end of the day in the wash-up it would be able to deliver more to their farmers.
What responsibility do you think farmers have to take for prepping for a rainy day? I mean, they are coming off some record prices that were fuelled by inflation and war, and that could never really last, could it? So where does the buck stop with them?
Oh, there has to be some responsibility with the farmers and with the banks. And I guess, resilience is a very trendy word for every business across every economy in the world. We've seen disruption, COVID, the Ukraine war. These have had huge impacts on inflation, labour supply chains. We do have to build that into any business model, whether you're a small, medium enterprise or you're a big multinational like Fonterra.
So, Minister, what do you expect from the banks? Be specific, please.
I mean, the banks are business partners with all the farmers, and there's huge amounts of capital involved in most farming operations. The banks have been making very healthy profits, even while there have been some pressures and strains on the farmers and the farming systems. The banks have to take some responsibility to help farmers through these difficult times so that they can see their way forward.
So what, mortgage holidays, Minister, and a sharper pencil when it comes to interest rates?
I know that the banks, for some of their customers, will be doing that. They've just got to be fair to all of their customers. There's always a view that, some farmers will fall over, someone else will pick them up and run their business. Look, they should be fair to people who, through no fault of their own, are seeing downward trend in the global dairy prices. Some of them might have been prepared for it. A lot of them might not have.
Do you think they are being fair and kind to their customers, as they should be?
I hear different stories. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not.
What is your message to farmers who are struggling right now on low morale?
Look, they have to talk with one another, talk to some of the older farmers who will have seen these tough times before. There'll be advisors, and we have MPI, have advisors out on the ground now to help connect to farmers who might not be part of networks to provide some alternatives, whether it be changing their farming system or cutting back their costs or just looking at ways of getting through the tough times. And often, when things are tough, people don't see the wood for the trees, and we have to assist them through these periods.
Appreciate your time, Minister. That's the Agriculture Minister, Damien O'Connor, 21 minutes after 5, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai or whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. If you're a dairy farmer, we'd love to hear from you. What does this mean for you? The dip in the global dairy trade, as you heard from the Minister there, reckons hundreds of millions just got sucked out of the economy. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. And the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go to the headlines now. Ko Karen Anō tēnei.
Thank you, Lisa. Lauren Dickerson has been found guilty of murdering her 3 young daughters after a 4-week trial at the High Court in Christchurch. Mrs Dickerson had argued she was insane when she killed 2-year-old twins Carla and Maya and 6-year-old Leonie at their home in Timaru in September 2021. Her husband Graham found the girls dead in their beds after arriving home from a work dinner. Dairy farmers say they'll be surviving month to month after international dairy prices crashed overnight to their lowest levels in nearly 5 years amid falling demand from China. Whole milk powder, which strongly affects the payout for farmers, fell almost 11% at the global dairy trade auction. The Reserve Bank has left the cash rate unchanged at 5.5% and says rates are likely to remain high into next year. National Party leader Christopher Luxon says it'll be tough news for many, but Finance Minister Grant Robertson says it shows the bank believes action to reduce inflation is working. A 32-year-old man will appear in court next week in connection with a fatal shooting during a fight on Auckland's Queen Street 2 weeks ago. He's charged with unlawful possession of ammunition. Police are still looking for Dariush Talangi, who's wanted for murder and wounding with intent to cause grievous bodily harm. And US President Joe Biden has pledged to visit wildfire-hit Hawaii as soon as he can. The death toll has risen to 101. Many Hawaiians have complained about the pace of the federal government's response. On the traffic front, north of Wellington, State Highway 1, Paikokariki, a crash about an hour ago has blocked the right lane northbound before the State Highway 59 Paikokariki on-ramp. Expect delays and pass with care. And roadwork closures on Auckland's motorways tonight will include a full closure southbound between Takanini and Drury from 9 tonight till 5 in the morning. Allow extra time for any required detours. We'll have more news headlines and any traffic updates for you around 20 to 6.
Ngā mihi, Karen. England and Australia are both hoping to make history by reaching the FIFA Women's World Cup final for the first time when they meet in Sydney tonight. The Matildas had never advanced beyond the quarter-finals before this tournament, while European champions England are playing in their 3rd successive World Cup semi-final. 81,000 fans will pack out Stadium Australia tonight for the big match, and we're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. Felicity, what can we expect from the semi-final, please?
Well, if you think of any match-up in sport between England and Australia, there's that fierce rivalry, whether that's cricket, rugby, netball, and I think the Matildas and Lionesses are hoping to add to that storied history between these two countries tonight as well. There is a little bit of pressure on both teams going into this. The Matildas with that home pressure and the crowd wanting them to still progress further through this tournament. And for the Lionesses, they're actually ranked higher, so they're 4th compared to the Matildas' 10th. And last year when they run the Euros, they actually got heaps of support at home and all of this backing. So it's wanting to keep these fans that they picked up a year ago, continuing to stick with them through another big tournament. And they, coming into this World Cup, they'd lost a couple of players to injury, a couple of key players. They've currently got a player suspended, but it's that kind of adversity which they say has actually bonded this team over this time, especially going into these business end of the tournament. And England defender Millie Bright believes her side is ready for the big moments, including tonight.
You want that environment, you want it to be tense, you want it to be noisy. You know, it's a proud moment in the women's game where people turn on the TV back home and they see what an incredible atmosphere we've created. So credit to Australia for selling out the stadium and creating that atmosphere, because, you know, like we always know, the women's game is still on a journey, but what a place to be.
And so the results at the big tournaments are on the Lionesses' side, and they've got a coach, Serena Wiegman, who has actually been at this business end in the final of the tournament, coaching the Netherlands last year. So there's players in this team that play at all the top European sides. But for all of those things around England, the Matildas, they've got a little bit of confidence as well. And their goalkeeper, Mackenzie Arnold, she was the star of the quarterfinal shootout. And she's said even prior to this World Cup campaign, the Matildas were starting to realise what they were capable of.
The French game, the friendly before the World Cup, and we were all in the change room, and Sam said, you know, I think this is a time now that we're all really together, and like this is the time that we can really believe that we can go all the way, because, you know, we've just come off beating England, Spain, France and all these top teams that maybe we hadn't done in the past. So I think just everyone's confidence radiating off each other, and being together and believing in each other, no matter who's starting, who's coming on, whatever it is. I think that's just really gone a long way in the confidence for everyone.
And the Sam there that Mackenzie mentioned, that's Sam Kerr. So that's the captain of the Matildas who has had a limited involvement in this tournament as she's had a calf injury. There are still some questions around, as just about everyone has a question for a player from Australia or anyone that they're playing against, what they think of Sam Kerr. We're not sure whether she'll start tonight, but if she does, Millie Bright, who we heard from earlier there, she's actually club teammates with Sam Kerr at Chelsea, so she'll know her strengths and weaknesses. It's going to be some interesting matchups across the park tonight.
Yep, and who knows what it means to play in front of a home crowd. Thank you, Felicity. That is sports reporter Felicity Reid. Now, let's stay with the footy theme and go to Sydney now. Joining us is Brad Evans, food and beverage manager at the famous Coogee Bay Hotel in Sydney. And guess what? He's an Englishman. Hey, is that awkward, Brad?
Hey there, how are you?
I'm very well. Are you hunched in a quarter so people can't hear your accent? Is it awkward being an Englishman with the game tonight?
Oh no, bring on the banter. You know, it's going to be a great night for both countries, and you know, we're really anticipating a really big night ahead. So yeah, it's great.
Tell us more about that. What are you expecting? Who are you expecting? How many?
It's going to be a great crowd. You know, we're expecting anything from around 800 to 1,000 people in the venue. We've got multiple areas which are showing the game. We've got Selena's, our entertainment centre, big screen, the beer garden, which I believe is the best beer garden in Sydney. But that'll be full. And then we're also showing it in the restaurant as well. So it gives the opportunity for families to come in, enjoy some good food and enjoy the game as well.
So up to 1,000 people, how would that compare to just your average night? It's going to be like a summer night. You know, we're expecting, you know, we're always a busy venue. We're always got, 600-700 people. But I think this is, there's such a big traction behind the World Cup. It's been such a great event for not just us, but for Sydney as well. So, yeah, it's a big night ahead, but we're ready to look after everybody and give them a great night. Talk to me about the level of enthusiasm there has been for this tournament, Brad. What have you observed?
I think it's just been great, to see. Soccer's on such normally strange times. The European soccer's on late at night, but the kickoff times have been at 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock, and it's brought great crowds out. And Coogee is such an international, venue for different people from different backgrounds enjoying the game, and it's really brought the best out of Sydney. And I think it's for the future of soccer, it's great, and also for business as well.
Can you think of another women's sport that would have filled the pub like you were getting crowds?
The Olympics brought a great crowd. When the Olympics was on, that's always brings a lot of people together. But this has to be, hands down, from me, from my experience working in this venue, one of the biggest sporting events I've ever worked at. It's just great to see.
Brad, I'm sorry, but I'm putting you on the spot here. What is the scoreline, please, and who will you be cheering for?
I'm definitely going to be supporting England. I'm probably going to get it a little bit off from my co-workers, but I'm an Australian citizen as well. So, I've got to support England, my home country, and I'm going to say it's going to be 2-1 to England.
An Aussie citizen and supporting England. Wow, is it a tug of war or an easy choice?
It was an easy choice, I'm going to have to say. But if Australia win, I'll be supporting them in the final. But it's just going to be a great event for everybody to come down to Coogee Bay Hotel and enjoy some quality food and drinks and soak up the fun.
Well, I suppose that's the joy of it for you, isn't it, Brad? You get, as we would say in this part of the world, 2 sucks of the salve. You get a couple of chances, don't you?
Exactly. Yeah, it's a rare occasion. I get to be happy with whichever team goes through. If Australia take it through in the final on Sunday, would be an absolutely incredible event, but not just for the pub, but also, the country as well.
Don't tell anyone, Brad, but I'm supporting England as well. Hey, thank you for joining us. That is Brad Evans. He's from the Coogee Bay Hotel in Sydney. It's expected to be absolutely heaving tonight with up to 1,000 people. 29 minutes to 6. Kia amo tonu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's time for the business news now. Ko taku hoa e Naianei, ko Nona Peltier, who is in the studio. Okay, Nona, let's talk about Fletcher Building's full year result. Disappointment. What's the reason?
Well, they had flagged that they were going to take a substantial hit to their bottom line. $250 million they've set aside to finish the International Convention Centre and their hotel complex in Auckland. So that's one run over after another. And so they said that the insurance is basically not going to cover the additional costs that are involved. So anyway, that was flagged. So the market wasn't too upset about that. The profit was down 46%. But the bigger issue was what's going on in Western Australia. So there's a concern there. They've got some housing, and some of the housing has been affected by leaky pipes. They don't know exactly what's behind it. This is Fletcher still is looking at it and trying to figure out what's causing it. About 1,500 homes are involved, but the market, especially the Australian punters, aren't too convinced about the 1,500 number and are concerned that there's maybe 15,000 homes, possibly even 30,000 homes. So we're quite savage in marking down Fletcher's share price. Dropped 8% today as a result of that, probably. And also because in Australia, a number of the construction companies there had beat expectations and Fletcher didn't. So that was another reason why the company was marked down. So there you go.
And talk to us about the Reserve Bank. It expects to keep the official cash rate above 5% for the next couple of years. And what's the reaction been to that?
Well, interesting. So economists say it's been mildly hawkish tone from the Reserve Bank. So I was looking at the numbers, and so they're looking at keeping the numbers up high really for 2 years, around 5% or more. Perhaps even another rate hike at some point in the first half of 2024 is on the cards as well. So that, now the rate hike would only be perhaps not that great, but the Reserve Bank is talking, 5.6. We're at 5.5. Overall, look, the market is a little bit mixed. Right away, though, the New Zealand dollar shot up. Shot up from a very low point.
As did my head hearing that.
Well, I have to tell you, let's just talk about the dollar for a second here. It's still under pressure, and that's mostly to do with what's happening in China, because they're one of our biggest trading partners. Their market's looking pretty sick. So our Kiwi is trading at 59.7. That's where it finished today. That's an improvement on where it started the day. So, not great. And also 92.5 Australian and 46.9 pence.
So it's dropped below the 47 that you've been running at a couple of days.
Yeah, so but that's an improvement on where we started the day after the somewhat hawkish tone of the Reserve Bank. Where is this going, you might ask? I don't know. Does anybody? The economists are kind of saying, well, we'll see what happens with inflation. The Reserve Bank is suggesting that inflation won't get to that 2% mark, which is their middle of their target, for a couple more years. So there you go.
Okay, Nona, before you go, you're all business all the time, so I'm asking you to think of this as a business decision. It's an emotional investment of your time and energy. England or Australia?
Well, would you rather me tell you about the markets?
Okay, then.
Okay, so the top 50 index fell about 0.5%. 58-point drop to 11,763, and I don't care who wins.
Thank you, Nona. Nona Peltier with her football commentary there. Like many small Hawke's Bay settlements decimated by Cyclone Gabrielle, Pakowhai remains a shell of its former self, and locals fear it may never be the same again. On February the 14th, the Tutaikuri and Rurora rivers, which surround the township, burst their banks and flooded the fertile farming plain. Jimmy Allingham and cameraman Angus Drever visited the area for their second report in a series, 6 months on from the cyclone.
Chester Hope Kennels owner Diane O'Neill says business is starting to return back to normal. But while they're able to house cats and dogs whose owners are at work or out of town, she and husband Kerry's home remains uninhabitable. Before moving in with a daughter, they'd been staying in Havelock North, and Mrs O'Neill says not being able to walk home across the yard after work every day has been a wrench.
When we were living in Havelock at a friend's house, I would hop in my car every night and leave the place and cry. Just hop in my car and cry all the way to Havelock, because for me, it's just, I've lost my home, I've lost a place for my family and my grandchildren, and I feel like I've lost 6 months of my life because of it all so far.
On the day of the cyclone, she and son-in-law Trent Bray battled chest-high water to carry 60 dogs and several cats to safety. The pair had to smash their way into the school next door, which is on slightly higher ground. All the animals survived. This is Mrs. O'Neill speaking with me back in February.
They were on these tables in cages all around the building. We actually had some girls that were on heat, so they were all in here, away from the males that were in here. So, yeah, we've had them spread out up high.
The O'Neills can rebuild their house, but they say that with so many homes classified as Category 3, not suitable to be rebuilt, Pakowhai won't be the same as it was.
70 houses. I mean, Pakowhai is going to be a ghost town, and we're the lucky ones. You know, I feel so sorry for people I know in the community that can't come back. Yeah.
And rebuilding their waterlogged house is a daunting task.
They're going to take all the walls off. A lot of the roofs in the bathroom are getting replaced. There's holes in all the floors. They're going to just lift all the floors. As you can see, they're all beveled, stuffed. They basically have to strip it right back. It needs to be re-cleaned, and then they're going to have to go into the house, remove all the silt, and it has to be like below 300 mils, I think. And then they can start recladding, flooring, everything from scratch.
Life's been tough. Mrs. O'Neill's parents were also forced out of their flood-damaged home, and another of Mrs. O'Neill's daughters and her family are now in a sleep out at the kennel, having lost their home too.
Her partner was just staying here in the camper at night because we had to have someone on site because of looting, because of the dogs on the property, so just for security. So they've been apart for probably a good 4 months since the flooding.
Mrs. O'Neill says the past few months have taken a toll, particularly when it rains and water pours into the property. Then there are the battles with insurance companies.
Overall, it's mentally taxing because you spend your whole time getting quotes, getting claims, and then they come in like 250,000 under what it should be, and you've got to get them back up to what it should be, and it's really, really hard.
I met Gary Spence at his property on nearby Brookfields Road in April. He and wife Liz evacuated from their section before the floodwater completely submerged their single-storey house. It's still standing, but smells of mould inside, with weeds growing from the walls and the scratch marks of rats visible in the windows. The couple are keen to return to their land, but for now, they can't.
It's a bit of a difficult one. We're not allowed to live here after I was born here 77 years ago next week. And, it's a bit tough. But, but really we are pretty lucky because we've had a full payout from the insurance company and we've actually bought a house over in Taradale.
Mr. Spence hopes flood mitigation works will one day mean the land is deemed safe to live on again.
We're doing okay. And my wife in particular is really looking forward to the move into what she can call her own home.
For now, the Spence family land, formerly home to beautifully curated gardens, is being leased for cropping.
Life throws a few curved balls at you now and again, and you've just got to go with it. And we were looking at downsizing perhaps, and it's been forced upon us. Well and truly, my wife's had a lovely shopping time buying fridges and stoves and whatever that's needed. She's done a fabulous job.
Like just about every cyclone victim you speak to, Mr. Spence insists he's one of the lucky ones.
We've been very, very lucky. We got out before the floods came. We were warned and got out, so we didn't go under any stress of having to climb on roofs or anything like that. No, we're very fortunate compared to some.
Fortunate perhaps, but like the O'Neills, Mr. Spence and his wife have endured a long winter of waiting.
And if you were listening to that report on radio, do check out the video version. We'll put it on our website. And the third and final part of our series this week on Hawke's Bay's recovery will focus on flood-affected growers. It is 20 minutes to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. Let us know your thoughts on the cyclone recovery and the drop in dairy prices, how that might affect your community. Also interested in your thoughts on the footy game tonight, Australia versus England. 2101 on text. You can tweet us at checkpointrnz or the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for us to head over to the headlines. Anea Karen, Mina Pitspita Kōrero.
Lauren Dickerson cried as she was led from the dock in the High Court at Christchurch after being found guilty of murdering her 3 young daughters at their home in Timaru in September 2021. Mrs Dickerson's parents say the deaths of 2-year-old twins Carla and Maya and 6-year-old Leonie were the result of a debilitating mental illness. Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor has told Checkpoint that the biggest fall in international dairy prices for nearly 5 years is a big hit on our biggest export driver, one that's likely to run into hundreds of millions of dollars. He says the sector is still too reliant on China, where demand for dairy is falling. Ukrainian security services have released footage showing the moment they used an experimental sea drone to attack Russia's bridge to Crimea last month. Russia says 2 civilians died in the blast. Ukraine says more assaults will follow. The mother of a 6-year-old boy who shot his teacher in the US state of Virginia has pleaded guilty to a charge of felony child neglect. It comes 7 months after Deja Taylor's son used her handgun to critically wound Abigail Zwerner in class. She faces up to 5 years in prison. The teacher has filed a $40 million lawsuit. And the Matildas and England's Lionesses are hours away from the FIFA Women's World Cup semi-final at Stadium Australia in Sydney. Kick-off is at 10 New Zealand time tonight, and the winners will play Spain in Sunday's final. On the traffic front, just one new issue to report. On Auckland's southwestern motorway, State Highway 20, a breakdown is blocking lane 2 southbound on the Mangere Bridge between Nielsen Street and Mahunga Drive. Pass with care and expect delays. We'll have the latest news at 6.
Thank you, Karen. We as adults have failed our mokopuna. That is the message from activists demanding the government introduces tougher rules around vaping. They presented a petition to Parliament today calling for urgent changes in order to prevent health impacts on young people. Our reporter Ashley McCall and camera operator Sam Rillstone went along.
Rangatahi marched up the steps of Parliament this afternoon, armed with a petition containing over 13,000 signatures. Year 11 Sacred Heart College student Hanoa Ramone is one of many teens worried about the health impacts vaping is having on her generation.
Definitely killing us. Yeah. We're going to become the statistics in however many years when all that stuff comes out. We're going to be the ones that everyone's looking at because we're the ones that are affected by it the most. By the time we turn 18, whatever, it's going to be 10 years for some people vaping.
16-year-old Rihanna La'afapake says vaping is ingrained in her peer group.
It's not like really the go these days, but like it's normalized into them now because as the politics have done, they just made it normalized and they said it's a healthier option than smoking.
Charlie Christie started the petition after her 14-year-old son became addicted to vaping, which he was introduced to by a friend. She started getting calls from his teachers who noticed he was leaving class to vape in the toilets and has noticed the effects on his health, with throat and chest infections, a constant cough and headaches.
My blood boils when I drop him off at school and I see kids walking down the street in their school uniform puffing away on a vape. It drives me mad, drives me mental. It's time for change. Enough's enough.
She's spoken to other parents who say kids as young as 7 are getting their hands on vapes. About 30 people accompanied the petition to Parliament, some of whom made impassioned speeches.
We as adults have failed to protect them by not learning lessons from the past and keeping products designed to addict their user out of their hands and out of their community.
Latest Asthma Foundation data shows around 20% of young people under 18 vape regularly. From October, vape stores will be banned from opening 300 metres away from schools and marae. But Vape Free Kids organiser Tammy Downer says major loopholes remain in the law.
So all of the ones that have rushed to open over the since June, since they announced the intention to stop it, have rushed and opened, and they're all going to be apparently not considered under the change. It's only for new stores from there, October.
The group wants restrictions on vape flavour names and for the products to only be available from pharmacies, as in the case in Australia. Labour MP and the Health Select Committee chairperson, Tracy McClellan, received the petition on behalf of the government. When questioned about loopholes in the law, she acknowledged the government still has work to do.
The Minister of Health is constantly looking at all of the various different ways that
new measures can be put in place. The government's certainly not afraid of standing up to the tobacco and the vaping industry, so I expect that we'll see more and more changes as time goes on, sooner rather than later.
Prime Minister Chris Hipkins hasn't ruled out cracking down on shops that have already opened near schools.
It is 14 minutes away from 6. Kia amo tōne mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. After a 4-week trial, it took a jury 2 days to find Lauren Dickerson guilty of murdering her 3 young daughters. Dickerson now faces a life sentence for each murder conviction. Her parents say this was not our daughter and believe a debilitating mental illness caused her to kill 6-year-old Leonie and 2-year-old twins Carla and Maya. The jury disagreed and believes she knew what she was doing. Professor Thea Brown from Monash University's Filicide Research Hub and one of the authors of the book When Parents Kill Children joins us now. Kia ora, Professor. Thank you very much for your time. I know you've been watching this trial from afar, guilty on 3 counts of murder. What are your initial thoughts on the verdict?
Well, I think it's a very harsh verdict. I think the community is not very sympathetic to mothers who kill all their children. Similar situations have happened in Australia where the jury's shown no sympathy to the mother, and when eventually the final sentence has been reduced on appeal, it looks from afar like the jury did not accept the defence's view that that Mrs. Dickerson was mentally ill. And from our research, we would say, yes, that she was mentally ill.
Is the jury then an appropriate way to decide this kind of case? There was a lot of expert evidence from people in the mental health field. Is there a better way to do this?
You could argue that it would be better tried before a single judge. I'm not sure that would improve the outcome for the person who's been convicted, because I think that there's very little sympathy shown to mothers who kill their children, particularly if they kill a number of children. It's not common, but it does happen, and all the sort of characteristics of a mother who does that were exhibited by Mrs. Dickerson. So I think it looked to me that the defence presented a clear case of mental illness and other stressful factors, but the jury didn't accept that.
You say there is a lack of sympathy for women. Do you think it would be different if it was a father standing trial?
I think there's a lack of sympathy for any parent who kills a number of children. I think they're particularly unsympathetic to mothers because they think that mothers have a caring role. They believe that mothers have a stronger responsibility to care for their children than they believe fathers have. So I think, yes, that because she was a woman, because she was a mother, that there was less sympathy shown to her.
Some women do murder their children, but in this case, you think that there was deep-seated health issues that led to this?
Yes. In the evidence that the defence presented, she had long-standing depression, which they described as a postpartum depression. She may have been depressed before that, I don't really know. But she also had many of the stress factors that such mothers have. She had a stressful departure from her country of origin, moving to New Zealand. She had the stress of trying to get pregnant. She had the stress of settling in a new country. And she would not have been, what you might say, integrated in her community, being a relatively recent settler. And there was reference in the defence to the fact that she'd experienced quite a lot of domestic tension.
Professor, do you think that prison is the right place for a mother in this situation?
No, I don't think so. But I'd have to say that it does offer some advantages to her, because there is the opportunity that she will get treatment. I don't know what kind of treatment opportunities there are in New Zealand prisons, but if she were in an Australian prison, she would be sent to a prison for psychiatric patients or residents, and she would get treatment. she would not feel that life had very much to offer her at this point. And so she may not really want to be outside of prison. I don't know. But look, she certainly needs a lot of treatment, a lot of care and a lot of support.
Thank you for your time this evening and your thoughts on that. That is Professor Thea Brown, who is from Monash University and specialises on research into parents who kill their children. It is 9 minutes away from 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. North Korea says a US soldier is seeking refuge in the isolated nation because of his treatment by the US Army. Private Travis King dashed across the border while tagging along on a tourist group trip to the demilitarised zone last month. North Korea state media says Private King, a black soldier, was facing inhumane maltreatment and racial discrimination in the US Army. Phil Vine from World Watch reports.
Pyongyang's first public comments on a high-stakes international incident.
What they're saying is he expressed his willingness to seek refuge inside that totalitarian state.
North Korea sheltering and protecting a US soldier, and state media taking full advantage of the propaganda value. Here's CNN's Will Ripley.
He harbored ill feeling against inhuman maltreatment and racial discrimination within the US Army.
But the Pentagon remains suspicious of Private King's reported explanation. Here's Oren Lieberman.
A U.S. defense official has told CNN that they can't verify these alleged comments coming from Private King as they were reported in North Korean state media.
They've taken time in revealing Travis King's situation. It's been a full month since the 23-year-old dashed from south to north. No mean feat. It's one of the most fortified zones in the world. Here's BBC's Jean McKenzie.
He booked himself onto this tour of the demilitarised zone, so the border between North Korea, and this is the point which he ran across the border and essentially has disappeared into North Korean custody.
US officials believe it was intentional, revealing that Private King, a reconnaissance expert, had been in military jail on assault charges.
And he was being sent back to the US to be disciplined by the army, possibly even discharged.
Instead, he finds himself a guest of the North Korean government.
The focus for the U.S. remains on trying to find some way to bring King home, to bring him out of North Korean custody, back into South Korea and back to the United States. But at least as of right now, that remains an incredibly difficult prospect.
Washington and Pyongyang have no diplomatic relations, and previous releases have involved months of back-channel negotiations. Will Ripley believes that Private King, as a high-value hostage, won't be kept in a jail cell.
He's probably being held in some sort of a hotel room in Pyongyang, obviously kept isolated, no communication by phone or any other communication with the outside world, probably not even a television or radio, maybe some books if they have them in English.
The US government's still weighing up whether to regard Private King as a prisoner of war. That would guarantee their defecting soldier additional rights under the Geneva Conventions.
Rats, stoats and possums, you've been warned deadly AI may be becoming more of a reality than science fiction. In a groundbreaking evolution in pest control, a new device being developed here in Aotearoa uses artificial intelligence to identify our most invasive species. It recognises and kills these furry ferals almost immediately while leaving native animals and domestic pets alone. The world first technology is bringing the country one step closer to being predator-free by 2050. John Dunn has the story.
At least 100 kills. That's what project lead Dr. Helen Blackie from Boffa Miskel says the new AI-activated trap is capable of before it needs servicing. It's one of the latest inventions utilising artificial intelligence to tackle one of the country's most pressing issues.
It's able to identify at an extremely fast speed any species that comes up to it. And if it identifies that animal as being a pest species, then it activates the trap. If it identifies that animal as being, say, a native parrot, then it makes sure that the trap stays deactivated.
The trap is the result of 5 years of development by Critter Solutions, with funding from Predator Free 2050. Dr. Blackie says it prevents native animals being caught in traps and does so without mistake.
The best thing about it is it's highly, highly accurate. So AI enables us to not only identify the animal, but from a humaneness perspective, it also enables us to make sure the animal's in the perfect position for the trap to go off.
The device works by using artificial intelligence to scan the animal once it goes in for the bait. Looking out for features like fur and face shape, it designates whether it's one of its targets, animals like rats, stoats and weasels. Once it tells it is in the right place, it delivers blunt trauma force to the head, causing death almost instantaneously. And it does all this while resetting itself and saving people from regularly maintaining the trap.
When we put out our first trap, it killed its first possum within an hour and then reset itself and killed its next possum 2 hours later. And both those possums, it was almost instantaneous. They walked up, they put their head in, and they were gone.
For Predator-Free 2050, it's a game changer.
Kia are notoriously inquisitive, and you have to do a lot of work to keep them out of traps. With this AI stuff, they'll figure out that's a Kia, trap's not going to go off, that's a rat, yes it will.
Chief Executive Rob Forlong says it's bringing the goal much closer to reality.
It's 9,999 days till we become predator-free, and it's tools like this artificial intelligence traps and all those sorts of things that are going to get us there. And but probably the most important is the community involvement. And so many people are working so hard to make these things happen and to make Predator-Free 2050 happen.
And it won't just be used here. The device has potential anywhere in the world. Associate Professor Melissa Thomas at Murdoch University in Perth says it has major utility in Australia, where feral cats threaten the survival of over 100 native species.
They have a huge effect on our native fauna. I think every year they kill, over 1 million mammals, and also birds, reptiles and frogs.
The device won't kill domestic cats, potentially discerning them from feral cats by scanning for a microchip or collar. Some groups in the UK are also showing interest, where grey squirrels have overtaken its red squirrel population. Critter Solutions hopes the device will be available for commercial use next year.
OK, let's get to some of your feedback before the news at 6. Shall we start with the dairy prices and the drop in trade overnight? This person says, I'm bereft. We had an opportunity with our country to turn it into an incredibly high value add country that doesn't rely on other countries like China for our well-being. We turned it down in exchange for short-term gains from milk powder at the expense of our environment and overall wealth and well-being, this person says. The free trade agreements with the EU and UK won't help us sell milk solids, they say. Right. I've clearly picked a scab in terms of the Matildas versus England tonight. This person's got in touch to say, go England. I'm predicting 2-1 to England. Someone else says, reluctantly, I'm supporting England. As a Kiwi, I support anyone playing Oz. Another says, I'm a Brit. I'm going to the final in Sydney. I really, really hope Australia wins tonight. I actually do. And this one. We call Kiwis our cousins across the dish. We support Kiwis on the world sports stage. We give you special status for residency. And you barrack against us? Wash your mouth out. Go Matildas. That's from KB in Melbourne. KB, have you never had an uncle that you do not want to sit next to at Christmas dinner?
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening. I'm Karen McCarthy. Lauren Dickerson cried as she was led from the dock after being found guilty of murdering her 3 young daughters at the High Court in Christchurch. Dickerson was charged with murder in Timaru in 2021 after admitting to killing her 2-year-old twins, Carla and Maya, and 6-year-old Leonie. She pleaded not guilty, arguing in the 4-week trial it was infanticide and insanity. Neva Chittock reports from the courtroom.
The jurors delivered their majority verdicts this afternoon after more than 2 days of deliberation, finding Lauren Dickerson was not insane at the time of the killings and knew the act was murder. Some were audibly crying as they left the courtroom. Dickerson stood motionless in the dock as the verdict was read out, but wept as she was led out of court. She has been detained in a mental health unit by Justice Mander until sentencing.
The Resource Management Act has officially been repealed and replaced. A pair of bills, the Natural and Built Environment Act and the Spatial Planning Act, have both passed their 3rd readings at Parliament. The mammoth overhaul sets out how New Zealand's consenting and building system will work, how planning will take place and how the environment will be protected. The Minister for the Environment, David Parker, says the new legislation is faster, cheaper and better than the RMA and will have better environmental outcomes.
There'll be more permitted activities. There'll be less delay in both plans and consents. There's new national direction coming that's been drafted by the Infrastructure Commission to enable the sorts of infrastructure you need for housing. The system's going to save a lot of time, frustration and money.
A third piece of legislation around climate adaptation is not expected to be finished before the election. Dairy farmers say they'll be tightening their belts after international dairy prices crashed to their lowest level in nearly 5 years overnight. Katrina Pearson milks about 450 cows on 190 hectares in Northland. She says farm revenue will be down $200,000 and it will run at a loss this season. Whole milk powder, which strongly affects the payout for local farmers, fell almost 11% at the global dairy trade auction overnight amid softening demand from China. Earlier, Fonterra slashed its forecast payout for 2023-24. The Minister of Finance says it's not a surprise the Reserve Bank is holding steady on the official cash rate. The cash rate has been left unchanged at 5.5%. The Monetary Policy Committee says headline inflation and inflation expectations have declined, but core inflation pressures remain too high. Grant Robertson says every economist had predicted the Reserve Bank would hold rates where they are.
They have a job to do to get inflation back down. They have a tool to use that. I also read that they'll look at the data as it comes in, and so they'll make those decisions in the future based on the data they see.
The Monetary Policy Committee is ruling out any chance of rate cuts in the medium term. A petition organiser demanding for tougher restrictions on vapes is infuriated with the health impacts it's having on youths. More than 13,000 signatures were handed over to the government today, calling for a range of actions, including selling vapes in pharmacies only. Charlie Christie's 14-year-old son is addicted to them and has received calls from his teachers about him leaving class to vape in the toilets. She says she's frustrated at how easily accessible and addictive vapes are for teenagers.
My blood boils when I drop him off at school and I see kids walking down the street in their school uniform, puffing away on a vape. It drives me mad, drives me mental. It's time for change. Enough's enough.
Charlie Christie says they shouldn't be sold in supermarkets or dairies. The company whose workers were left in hospital after a gas explosion prank gone wrong says it's done its best to support its employees. Last August, a barbecue gas bottle was mistakenly left running overnight in a shipping container at a construction site in central Auckland. When 5 workers from subcontractor Vikshish and Borich opened the container, they could smell gas. One of the workers joked about igniting his lighter, and when he did, the gas exploded. Vikshish and Borich says it has improved its safety measures. It says 4 of the workers have returned to their full-time roles, while the man who pulled the prank has resigned. Australia's mushroom industry says it's absolutely impossible that a grower could produce poison fungi after the woman who prepared a fatal lunch containing suspected toxic mushrooms told police they were bought, not foraged. Here's World Watch's Charlie Drever.
Erin Patterson's former parents-in-law, Don and Gal Patterson, along with Gal's sister, Heather Wilkinson, all died from suspected mushroom poisoning. Another person remains in a critical condition. The ABC says Ms Patterson told police the fungi she used in the beef Wellington dish were a mixture of button mushrooms from a major supermarket and dried mushrooms from an Asian grocery store. Supermarket suppliers of mainstream mushroom varieties and exotic fungi producers argue they operate to the highest safety standards.
In sport, England face co-hosts Australia in the Women's World Cup semi-final later tonight. The winners will play Spain in the final in Sydney on Sunday. England coach Serena Wegman says it's time to deliver.
It's just very, very special to go so far in the tournament. But when you're there, when you're at the semi-final, you want to win it too because you really want to go to the final. I don't think they're the underdog. They play at home. The stadium will be really full. There's 2 teams that are very good, they're very strong.
Kick-off is at 10 o'clock. That's the news.
Tomorrow on Afternoons with Jessie Mulligan, Mary Holmes says if you're struggling to pay your rates, look into a rebate or a postponement. She'll tell me who qualifies and how they can apply for each. Plus, it's Link 3 Day, and we mark the conclusion of the FIFA Football World Cup by chatting to the Oceania Player of the Century, Winton Rufer, about his own World Cup memories back in Spain in 1982. That's our sporting history segment on Afternoons tomorrow on RNZ National.
Back to Checkpoint with Lisa Owen after the short forecast from Met Service to midnight on Thursday. For Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Waitarapa, fine spells and a few showers, clearing tomorrow morning or afternoon. For the remainder of the North Island, showers, heavy at times with isolated thunderstorms. Showers become confined to the west tomorrow. Snow affecting the Desert Road, clearing tomorrow afternoon. Marlborough Sounds, Nelson, Buller and Westland, fine about Westland. Elsewhere, showers, some heavy, with snow to 800 metres and possible thunderstorms, clearing this evening and becoming fine. The remainder of Marlborough and Canterbury, showers with snow to 700 metres, clearing tomorrow morning or afternoon and becoming fine. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, isolated showers becoming widespread this afternoon and evening. Snow lowering to 800 metres late. Showers clear tomorrow morning, but return to Fiordland in the evening. And the Chatham Islands, partly cloudy. It's 6:30.
Kia ora rā, e ho no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The dairy market has gone sour overnight, leaving some farmers potentially deep in debt. Prices crashed to their lowest levels in nearly 5 years at the global dairy trade auction. It follows a significant dip at the auction 2 weeks ago too. Demand from China's gone soft and experts say prices are unlikely to rebound before the end of the year. Fonterra's already slashed its forecast milk price for the season, meaning some farmers are losing money. Add to that the prospect of another interest rate rise and it paints a potentially dreary farmscape. Well, joining us now is Federated Farmers Dairy Industry Group Chair Richard McIntyre. Hi, Richard.
Hi, Lisa.
It does seem grim. What does it actually mean for people on the farm?
Look, it's a very difficult time on farm. You know, farmers are very busy calving the cows, and we've had very wet weather conditions. So there's a lot of, a lot of tired farmers who are at the moment having to try and cash flow or try and work out how they're going to cash flow through the next year, and make up for the big deficit that has been left by their milk price or expected milk price being slashed.
Do you know how many farmers will not be reaching a break-even point because of the price?
Look, I think we're at the point where the vast majority are now. We're a good $1.50 to $2 below break-even, or below the average break-even, which will mean that, essentially everyone will be collected in it, but there'll be a lot of farmers off a lot worse off than that.
Can you give me any kind of estimate about what you think this has sucked out of the economy?
So the estimate that came from Dairy NZ was $5 billion from Fonterra's $1 drop 2 weeks ago.
So what does that look like on the farm and in communities that are attached to who live and die on what happens on the farm?
Right, so it's taken, I think, on average about $200,000 out of each dairy farming business, and obviously that money gets spent in the rural communities, whether it's rural service providers, etc., or just in the community itself through the farm's drawings, etc. So there'll be a lot of rural communities that are suffering. As you know, money spent in communities goes around 5 or 6 times. So even for people that aren't directly associated with agriculture within that community, they will still see a bit of a downturn.
Do you think this is going to force some people to sell up?
Look, I hope not. I hope farmers can get through it. All those that were viable or are viable at normal market conditions with normal interest rates, normal commodity prices, and normal farm working expenses. Hopefully the banks will support them through to those times again, because we're only a year, maybe 2 away from having reasonable interest rates again, and commodity prices will rise again as well. And so, if farmers can get through to that, then hopefully they'll be supported by their banks, and will not have to sell.
Yeah, on critical analysis, some people would say there have been some very good years for dairy farmers, and farmers should be prepared for a downturn and should have squirreled away resources. What do you say in response to that?
Look, that's a very good point. And so the point I would make is that in the last few good years that we've had, the dairy industry has actually reduced debt by $5 billion. So there's been a lot of debt paid down, and it has put dairy farmers into a better place to be able to borrow money now from the banks as required. The farms that will be hit the most, or the farming business that will be hit the most, will be the ones that have expanded recently and have lower equity levels and obviously high levels of debt, which have been significantly affected by these interest rate changes that we've had.
Are we too reliant on China still?
Well, it's an interesting question that gets asked all the time. The answer to it is often, well, do you want us to sell the product to the people who will pay the most, or do we want to spread the risk? And I guess that's the question that will be asked of processors again now. In that respect, it would be good to have other markets for when China does stop buying. We know that they built up a lot of inventory during COVID in order to ensure that they had a whole lot of food on hand to be able to feed their people with potential lockdowns, etc. And now they're potentially running down that inventory a little bit at the moment, and demand is softer as a result.
It doesn't have to be an either-or, though, does it, Richard? You can keep selling to China, but you potentially want to have other people on your books for times like now when the demand does go soft. So what are your options for market expansion?
Look, obviously these are more questions for processors, who actually do sell the product than for dairy farmers themselves. But,
but you'll have an eye to that because it directly affects what happens to your people.
Well, we definitely have an interest in it. And so there are a lot of other markets that we are selling to. As you know, we have a free trade agreement coming up with the EU and the UK, which will increase, although it wasn't super for dairy, to be fair, it will increase the amount of product going in there. We do sell a lot of product into South America, Central America, and the Middle East as well. And we can always look at expanding those.
What's your expectation around banks? The Agriculture Minister has said he expects them to be fair across the board with all farmers who are facing tough times as a consequence of this. What are your expectations?
Yeah, look, very similar to that, really. What we're asking banks to do is to take a medium to long-term view of the viability of dairy farming businesses or farming businesses as a whole, to be fair, and understand that this is a bit of a blip at the moment. Like I said, high interest rates, falling commodity prices, and high farm working expenses all in one. And so they shouldn't just be judging, this year's financial performance or judging a business on this year's financial performance. They should look at what its viability would be in normal circumstances.
At the same time, is there just some farms that shouldn't be in business? Peak dairy, too many, market not sustaining it at the moment. It is the natural business cycle.
Look, there are always farms that are struggling to be profitable even at really high milk prices, and they have to question their viability, and I'm sure that the banks will. But it's really just about ensuring that the ones that are normally viable can survive and are supported by their banks.
It's been a lot going on, right? Interest rates, Cyclone Gabrielle, other extreme weather events, now this. How would you describe morale?
Yeah, morale is a bit of a struggle at the moment. It is challenging on farm. It feels like we've been hit by challenges constantly over the last few years, whether it's the supply chain issues that we had during COVID, which made it really hard to look after our animals and do a good job on farm, to, like you say, interest rates, the weather challenges. Some regions have just been constantly hit by storms and cyclones, etc. And I guess it's hard to go out and continue to do it at times. But, at the end of the day, the reason that we're farmers is that we love the outdoors, we love our animals, and we love the freedom and autonomy that it gives us. So that's why we keep getting up in the morning and going out in the rain, to be honest.
Really appreciate your time, Richard. Thank you so much for joining us. That is the Dairy Industry Group Chair for Federated Farmers, Richard McIntyre. It is 15 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. US President Joe Biden says he will go to Hawaii amid criticism of the government's response to the island's deadly wildfires. The death toll stands at 101, but at this stage only about 25% of the fire zone has been searched. Authorities hope it will be 85 to 90% completed by the weekend. 9 of the injured have been sent to the island of Oahu, which has Hawaii's only burns unit. CNN's Bill Ware has this report.
Me and Brittany will lead the front. We got right behind us. Just stay close.
When Charlie and Brittany Fleck saw pictures of the devastation on Lahaina, the couple from Maui knew they had to do something.
Come, we can give you cash. We got cash.
Money? Yeah, we need. Thank you. Right now. I think there's a big ice truck.
We got help on the way.
So they put out a plea on Facebook, and when thousands of dollars began rolling in, they began handing it out.
Hey.
Thank you so much.
We're coming for you.
Thank you.
Aloha.
But that didn't seem like enough, so they organized a caravan and sweet-talked their way past red tape and checkpoints, and when they finally saw what Lahaina looks like for the first time, they wept. But just on the edge of the burn scars, we find an inspiring example of Hawaiian togetherness.
A towel for your neck.
Cold towel, are you kidding? That is aloha hospitality. Yeah. Thank you.
There you go, man. Right there, over your neck. Keep you nice and cool.
Archie Kalepa is a Hall of Fame surfer and lifeguard with Maui roots that go back 9 generations. This is your actual house here, or?
Yeah, this is my actual home, and we was really lucky because our neighbors, they were here fighting the fire right at this corner, and the fire department said, "This is our last stand. We're going to hold the line right here."
But at another relief pod on a beach nearby, frustration has turned to anger.
You know, everybody's like, oh, you know, they're going to come and help. They're going to come and help. They don't give a about us. Nobody came for help us. You know what I mean? We rely on people like you guys that get compassion like we do. You know what I mean? That willing to help us because, please, we need help. We need help. We need the next step. This is just the first inning. This is the first inning of what we're facing.
Tourism is our number one source of income. I would hope that our representatives, our politicians, our government would ask the people from here, when can we open? They should not be telling us, oh, we want to open 6 months from now. The truth of the matter is, when you look at the overall devastation, we are not going to be ready to allow people to see what we're living through in 6 months.
Today marks the second anniversary of the Taliban regaining control of Afghanistan, throwing the country's future into doubt. Since then, Afghan people have suffered from food shortages, malnutrition and prolonged drought. Despite promises to be lenient, Taliban leaders are steadily cracking down on human rights. As CNN's Anna Corrin reports, no one is paying a higher price than women and girls.
To celebrate, the Taliban have announced a public holiday. But for the girls and women of this country, this is no celebration. Each day they are facing extreme repression and have now become prisoners in their own homes. The UN says the Taliban is implementing a system of total discrimination, exclusion and subjugation of women and girls, while Afghan women's rights activists are calling the Taliban's hardline stance as a war against women. We spoke to a university student inside Afghanistan who says there is no future for the women of her country. In the corner of her room, on a piece of string hanging by paper clips, are the treasured memories of 20-year-old Zara.
They are my favorite people, that I have them in my life.
Photos, drawings, mementos. A secret world of a life once lived that this Afghan university student now grieves for.
When I stand in front of the mirror, when I look at myself, I just see a different Zara from 2 years ago.
On the 15th of August 2021, Zara's life as she knew it was shattered. The Taliban swept to power after the US withdrawal from Afghanistan following its 20-year war, handing back control to the same group of Islamic extremists who ruled in the 1990s. While the Taliban promised to be more moderate and honour women's rights within Islamic law, the past 2 years have brought only a hardline stance towards women. The closure of secondary school for girls, the forced implementation of the burqa, the restriction on travel without a male chaperone, the banning of women from universities and working at NGOs, including the United Nations. And just last month, the Taliban closed all beauty salons that employed roughly 60,000 women. many of them the sole breadwinners of their homes.
Women's freedom doesn't exist. There is no such a thing as women's freedom anymore.
Women's rights activist Mahbouba Siraj, who stayed in Kabul while more than 1 million Afghans fled, says the Taliban government is erasing women from society.
Even the rights that we had in Islam, even the rights that we had in Sharia, we are losing all of that. So if it is not annihilation, what is it then?
For Zara, an aspiring designer, it's very clear what the Taliban demands of her.
Just to stay at home, get married, you have to give birth to children, that's it. And this is your life. This is what women made for.
While the international community repudiates the Taliban's treatment of women and girls, the Taliban is refusing to listen, saying it will not be pressured. CNN spoke to Taliban deputy spokesman Bilal Karimi. He proudly listed the Taliban's achievements. When we asked him about girls' education, he was very evasive, refusing to say when girls will be allowed to go back to school or university. All he said was that the Taliban needs to wait for the environment to become favourable. It's important to note this was the same line the Taliban gave back in the 1990s when they ruled for 5 years. In that time, girls were never allowed to return to school.
Pressure is mounting on European governments to improve migration pathways as more people die trying to cross the Mediterranean. Nearly 2,000 have perished or gone missing on the treacherous journey to Europe this year. It's the highest number since 2017. Deutsche Welle's Nita Blake-Person reports.
Cheers echo across the Mediterranean as people on this packed boat spot rescuers. Their 12-metre wooden vessel ran into trouble after departing from Libya a day earlier, leaving the 76 people on board stranded, including 24 children. They're among the more than 95,000 people who've set off from North Africa for Italy's shores so far this year. But an increasing number of migrants are dying on the treacherous journey. The number of people reported dead or missing on the so-called central Mediterranean route is at its highest level since 2017. As the total rises, so does the pressure on governments to act. On the Italian island of Lampedusa, authorities are desperate for help. Thousands of people have arrived there in recent days.
We're in the center of the Mediterranean and we can't turn away if there are people asking for help. Lampedusa cannot be left alone. We really need a European sea rescue force.
Many migrants leave North Africa from Libya and Tunisia. The EU has agreed to pay Tunisia more than €100 million to reduce the flow of migrants. Brussels also helps to cover costs for Libyan coastguards. But groups working with refugees and migrants say much more is needed to create safer pathways to Europe without people risking the dangerous Mediterranean crossing.
Millions of people are facing hunger in Sudan, with aid agencies warning that the country's situation is spiralling out of control. In Darfur, the scene of genocidal war in the early 2000s, the fighting has morphed into ethnic violence, with warring factions targeting African communities in the region. The ABC's Tom Melville has more.
Horse-drawn carts stacked high with both luggage and children. A common sight now in the Chad-Sudan border region. After 4 months of war, more than 1 million people have fled Sudan to neighbouring countries, and people inside the country are running out of food and dying due to lack of health care. Sami Talat is a volunteer working in a hospital in the city of Omdurman.
Today, a bomb hit a building next to the hospital, injuring 2 people, a mother and her daughter. We took the injured to the hospital, but it was closed and we had to look for a doctor through social media. We managed to reach a doctor, but unfortunately the mother died and only the daughter is alive.
Services in around 200 hospitals across the country have been suspended due to the armed conflict. Fighting broke out in Sudan in April after months of tensions between the military and a rival group, the Rapid Support Forces. Since then, Sudan's capital Khartoum has been reduced to an urban battlefield. Elsewhere, chaos. Thousands have been killed and there are massive shortages of daily necessities such as food and medicine. Spokesperson for the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Elizabeth Throssell, says it's difficult to establish the exact number of people killed so far in the conflict.
Due to the intensity of the fighting and the fact that the remains of many of those killed have not been collected, identified or buried, tentative figures indicate that more than 4,000 people have so far been killed, including hundreds of civilians.
The UN says the food shortage caused by the war has plunged 20 million people into severe acute hunger, representing 42% of the country's population. Spokesman for the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, William Spindler.
Since the start of the conflict in Sudan on the 15th of April, over 4.3 million people have been forced to flee. Within Sudan, over 3.2 million people have been internally displaced, including more than 187,000 refugees already residing in the country at the start of the crisis. As people continue to flee, displacement sites within Sudan and in neighbouring countries are rapidly becoming overcrowded.
The heads of 20 different humanitarian agencies have signed a joint statement saying that 14 million children are in need of humanitarian aid.
It's only hours to go before the Matildas' historic World Cup semi-final match in Sydney. The Aussie players say they're ready for an extremely tough clash with England. The ABC's Jacqueline Breen has all the excitement.
Go the Tillies! Yeah, Mackenzie! Yeah, Mary!
One by one, the Matildas step off the bus for a training session in the southern Sydney suburb of Kogarah, where 13-year-old fan and midfielder Giselle and her dad have come to show their support.
And Giselle, was it hard to convince your dad for you to have the day off school to come here?
Not really, he had the idea.
The training session was closed to the public, but Giselle and her football-mad dad, George, were happy just to stand at the driveway and give them a wave.
There you go, hey, we'll have him back. It's just a historical event, you know, like...
If you had a chance... to talk to them, what would you want to say to the Matildas?
Well, they've made the whole country proud.
All 23 members of the squad were on the field for training today. Goalkeeper Mackenzie Arnold joined coach Tony Gustafsson at the post-training press conference.
I guess the last couple of days have been a pretty big whirlwind for me. At the same time, I just tend to block it out because I know, to be honest, if I play like shit tomorrow, it could be a whole different attention on me. So I know the good comes with the bad, so I'm just sort of trying to take it in my stride.
Gustafsson told the press pack the team is keeping its cool, despite the hype and pressure.
The players have done a phenomenal job to come down from the emotional highs after the quarterfinal.
But he was tight-lipped about which 11 players will take the field first.
We know it's going to be an extremely tough semi-final because I have a lot of player availability.
Football fever is still running hot across the country and looks set to continue after the Cup. Today, Sydney FC announced they've broken their Women's A-League membership record, 2 months out from the start of the season. Outside the Matildas training session today, 13-year-old fan and player Giselle said the excitement's spread outside her club and those who were already fans.
Yeah, there's actually like a lot of people in my class talking about it. Earlier it was like just girls, but now it's starting to be like more boys talking about it and that.
Her father, George, says England will be very tough to beat and that the Matildas will win.
I think the crowd helps them, gives them that extra 10% that they need to get to the ball before the position. So I think we probably beat England in 90 minutes, 2-1.
I like that prediction. I want to go with that.
And that game kicks off at 10 tonight, New Zealand time, if anyone's interested. Potentially it's going to be excruciating in the office tomorrow. Don't forget to tune in at 5 a.m. tomorrow morning. First Up speaks to a West Auckland family displaced by the anniversary floods. They're all living in separate places while they wait to hear the fate of their damaged home. 5 a.m. tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Lauren Dickerson is spending tonight in a mental health facility after a High Court jury convicted her of murdering her 3 young daughters in Timaru in 2021. National says the Reserve Bank's decision to leave the official cash rate unchanged at 5.5% is incredibly sad. Labor says it shows the bank believes action to reduce inflation is working. Agriculture Minister Damien O'Connor has told Checkpoint a 7.4% dive in global dairy prices will be a big hit on the industry here. And thousands of football fans have begun gathering in Sydney